Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Nadler, and distinguished colleagues. When I came to the Congress almost 10 years ago, I was overwhelmed by the privilege of working here. Even now, I can't quite shake the feeling that we serve in the shadow of people like Abraham Lincoln, Sam Rayburn, and Shirley Chisholm. Now I sit in front of this storied committee with a simple message: the truth matters. This committee shapes our courts. It oversees the enforcement of our laws. It balances our cherished liberties with our need for security. To this committee especially, the truth matters. Yet today, this committee meets to promote a false narrative. It meets to continue the hoax, now fully rebutted, that Facebook and other social media have mounted a deliberate crusade to filter out conservative opinion. Congress and this committee should look hard at Facebook. Over 2 billion people use it. The Kremlin used it to widen American fault lines before an election. It has personal data on all of us. People get their news from Facebook. That is huge power. That power must be constrained by fairness, care, and responsibility, and making sure that happens is our job. Congress and the social media companies must make sure they contribute positively to American life. Instead, today we will amplify the financially lucrative and politically convenient hoax that Facebook is purposefully censoring Diamond and Silk. Let's spend a minute on the facts. Diamond and Silk got into a complicated commercial dispute with Facebook about how you can make money on their site. Facebook mistakenly told them their content had been judged unsafe. Facebook publicly and privately acknowledged their mistake, apologized, and reached out to them by phone, on email, and on Twitter to work this out. And most importantly, as the charts next to me show, Diamond and Silk suffered no decline in their interactions online compared to such liberal sites as Rachel Maddow and the Young Turks. Mr. Chairman, I was in business for many years. Assuming that roughly half of Facebook users lean right, what possible business logic is there in alienating half of your customers? There is none. Those are the facts, and that is the truth, and the truth matters. The problem is this particular truth is pretty boring. A commercial dispute doesn't fire anybody up. It does not play into the carefully manufactured fear of the American right that everybody is out to get them. Never mind that the right controls the White House, both houses of Congress, more and more of the Supreme Court, and governorships all over America. Never mind Sinclair. Never mind the global Murdoch news empire. The right must be under siege. Because if there is no siege, there is no fear, and there is no anger. And without fear and anger, well, people might not show up at the polls. Without fear and anger, people might ask themselves why we're mortgaging our children's future rather than improving their education. They might wonder why we haven't lifted a finger to shore up Social Security. They might realize that we've done absolutely nothing to rebuild our ports and our highways and our railroads. I was moved yesterday when President Macron of France spoke to us. From where I sat, you could look just past him and see the Marquis de Lafayette. Do you remember what he said? He said, "You can play on fear and anger for a time, but they do not build anything." Eventually, everyone will know that the charge that Facebook filters out conservative commentary is untrue, and that charge will go the way of Pizzagate and stand-down orders at Benghazi, of Obama wiretapping Trump and the Vince Foster murder, and all of these conspiracies that sprout around here like spring flowers. But in the meantime, we will have put one more dent in our democracy. Don't take it from this Democrat. Yesterday, Matt Makowiak, a Republican consultant and a veteran of the Bush administration, wrote in the Washington Times, quote, "Our obsession with political theater has brought us to the point where now a respected and important House committee will spend several hours taking testimony from 2 YouTube celebrities, all done at taxpayer expense." President Macron said something else yesterday that sticks with me. He said, "Without truth, there is no real democracy, because democracy is about true choices and rational decisions. The corruption of information is an attempt to corrode the very spirit of our democracies." Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, let's see past our differences. Let's see past the nonsense. Let's put past our differences to fight that corruption and that corrosion, because the truth matters. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our first panel of witnesses for being here today, and since we do not ask questions of members of Congress, we are going to thank you and excuse both of you. Printed. Put in the record. I would now like to introduce our second panel. Our first witness, Google, which has refused to appear today, is ranked first in the world and in the United States for user traffic according to Amazon's Alexa, which tracks such data. In addition to being the top search engine in the world, its subsidiary, YouTube, attracts 30 million daily visitors and boasts a total of 1.3 billion users. Google has been accused of maintaining bias against conservative views, both internally and on their platforms. For example, PragerU, a channel that features educational videos featuring the world's best thinkers, such as Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz speaking about the founding of Israel, was unjustly restricted by YouTube through a feature intended to filter out, quote, inappropriate content for younger audiences. The list of restricted content, according to PragerU, included videos titled, Why America Must Lead, The 10 Commandments, Do Not Murder, Why did America fight the Korean War, and the world's most persecuted minority, Christians. According to Dennis Prager, PragerU's founder, watch any of our videos and you'll immediately realize that Google YouTube censorship is entirely ideologically driven. For the record, our videos are presented by some of the finest minds in the Western world, including 4 Pulitzer Prize winners, former prime ministers, and professors from the most prestigious universities in America. As a result, PragerU has taken legal action in federal court. Our second witness today, which has also refused to appear, is Facebook. Facebook's website, according to Alexa, ranks 3rd in the United States and in the world. It receives 1.4 billion daily active users and boasts that people can, quote, express themselves freely, end quote, on its platform. According to a report issued by Media Research Center, this company suppresses pro-life advertisements in addition to conservative content. For example, quote, both Right to Life Michigan and the Wexford Misaki Right to Life were unable to advertise on the site because Facebook did not support ads for their business model, end quote. According to the report, Facebook only permitted the ads after media attention. In addition to the suppression of conservative and pro-life content, Facebook has been accused of removing content related to a police shooting that sparked overwhelming national attention. In the summer of 2016, the aftermath of the tragic shooting of Philando Castile was live streamed through Facebook. According to one description of Facebook's actions, quote, it suddenly disappeared from Facebook. A few hours later, the footage reappeared, this time with a label affixed warning of graphic content. In official statements, Facebook blamed the takedown on a technical glitch, but provided no further details. I believe we will learn more about, quote, enforcement errors, end quote, and technical glitches, end quote, later in this hearing. Our third witness is Twitter. Like our other invited witnesses on this panel, Twitter refused to attend. According to Alexa, Twitter's website ranking is 8th in the United States and 13th in the world. In terms of traffic, approximately 8,000 tweets are sent per second. In addition to the attacks on Representative Blackburn's pro-life ads, Twitter has been accused of suppressing the pro-life advertisements of Live Action. According to the report issued by the Media Research Center, Twitter demanded Live Action purge not only its Twitter, but also its website of a multitude of content, including ultrasounds, in order for it to advertise on the platform. Twitter was effectively trying to force Live Action to stop promoting everything it did as an investigative pro-life organization. While this committee has presented the opportunity for these companies to come describe their filtering practices and answer questions that members on both sides of the aisle have about these practices, their refusal to appear only creates more questions and more concerns. The committee is resolved to have its questions answered directly by these companies, and we will pursue whatever means necessary to get those answers. We now welcome our third panel of distinguished witnesses, who I believe are here. If you would please,
Mr. Chairman,
you'll get a chance to question these witnesses.
don't get an opening statement the way you just said.
Thank you all for joining us today. If you would all please rise, I'll begin by swearing you in. Do you and each of you swear that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you very much. Let the record show that all of the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Our first witnesses are social media personalities Lynette Diamond Hardaway and Rochelle Silk Richardson. Our second witness, Berin Szoka, the president of Tech Freedom. Our third witness is Professor Ari Waldman, a professor of law and the director of the Innovative Center for Law and Technology at New York Law School. And our fourth and final witness of the day is David Chavern, the president and CEO of News Media Alliance and the American Press Institute. Your written statements will all be entered into the record in their entirety, and we ask that each of you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time, there is a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson, you may begin. I understand you're going to share your 5 minutes. Welcome.
We would like to thank the Judiciary Committee for allowing us the opportunity to voice our concerns about conservatives being targeted and censored on social media platforms. Facebook, along with other social media sites, have taken aggressive actions to silence conservative voices such as ourselves by deliberately restricting and weaponizing our page with algorithms that censor and suppress our free speech. These biased algorithms are tactics designed to pick up on keywords, thus telling the pages how to behave in ways that repress and stifle express ideas, including shadow banning, which block our content from being seen by our followers while depriving our brand through the demonetization of our videos. Followers stopped receiving notification when we posted videos and content. Followers was also mysteriously unliked from our page. Subtle and slowly, Facebook used one mechanism at a time to diminish our reach by restricting our page so that our 1.2 million followers would not see our content, thus silencing our conservative voices. When we reached out to Facebook for an explanation, they gave us the runaround. Mark Zuckerberg testified before Congress and stated that the most important thing he cared about was making sure no one interferes in the 2018 elections. But after doing our research, we wondered if Mark Zuckerberg was using Facebook to interfere in the 2018 elections by labeling users' accounts as either liberal, very liberal, moderate, conservative, or very conservative. This is one of the main underhanded ways to censor conservatives. So if I'm labeled as very liberal without the option to edit it, update, and correct the settings, then algorithms are already put in place which allows advertisers that have liberal views, services, and causes to target me. And you can see the graph on the screen, and it shows clearly that our personal accounts have been already labeled. Diamond and Silk personal Facebook page has been labeled by Facebook as very liberal. Even though we are not very liberal, Facebook do not give us the option to change this label to conservative, making it less likely for us to see advertisement, news stories, and services for a conservative point of view. If Facebook labeled our user accounts as very liberal and got it wrong, how many more other users' accounts haven't they gotten wrong? On September 7, 2017, we received a message on our Facebook page which stated that limits has been placed on diamonds and silks, and you can see picture 2. You can see on picture 3 all of the complaints that have come in from our followers where they're not receiving notification. When watching our videos, it stopped. They can't watch our videos. We've also noticed how someone with a liberal point of view that spew hate against the president can garner up to 19 million views with only 539,000 followers, yet we have 1.2 million followers and only received 13,000 views on a video, and you can see that in picture 4. And then in picture 5, you can see the comparison from back then till today. Also, if you look at picture 5, part 2, when we uploaded a video on March 4, with 1.2 million people, we was only able to reach 37,000 views. But as soon as Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, this here issue came to light and they started taking those algorithms off, we uploaded the same video on April the 12th and it was able to garner 400,000 views. After looking at our analytical on picture 5, part 3, after looking at our analytical, you can clearly see that the restrictions are back because after the 12th, everything started going back downhill. In 2016, with less than 1 million followers, our reach page would garner 5 to 8 million people or more within a week. All of that changed when the algorithms was placed back on our page to suppress our reach. YouTube also demonetized 95% of our videos in 2017, categorizing it as hate speech, even though our account was in good standard. We also show that Mark Zuckerberg said he don't allow hate speech, yet when people say the word I hate or we hate, those people also garner views. Was it in an enforcement error for 6 months, 29 days, 5 hours, 40 minutes, and 43 seconds of chatting and emailing about the same issue and being told that my issue would be escalated to a Facebook team, a spam team, the technical team, the appeal team, the internal team, the policy team, only to be told on January the 8th, 2018 that a request was never sent? And we have the proof. See picture 10 and picture 11. Censorship is no hoax, it's real. It's wrong for these social media giants to suppress and disregard people by diminishing and denying them their free speech. If social media is supposed to be a place for all ideas or to express an idea, then algorithms and tactics should not be in place to suppress some ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hardaway. Mr. Szoka, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Nadler. Thank you for
You want
inviting
to turn your microphone on.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Nadler, for inviting me to testify here before your committee today. Mr. Chairman, it's a particular honor to testify before your retirement. We at Tech Freedom haven't always agreed with you over the years, but I've always considered you to be among the most thoughtful members of Congress, true lawyer's lawyer. I particularly commend you for the work that your committee did over the last year on how to combat online sex trafficking. The legislation produced by this committee was carefully tailored to help prosecutors stop sites like Backpage and ensure that victims receive restitution. Your bill, which I'm sorry to say was combined with another less thoughtful bill, would have done so without disrupting the careful balance struck by Congress in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act of 1996. So I'm here today to remind lawmakers why Congress made the right decision in enacting Section 230 and to explain why a fairness doctrine for the internet would be an even worse idea than was a fairness doctrine for broadcasting. At recent hearings with Facebook's CEO, lawmakers repeatedly asked about Facebook's supposed political bias. As the president of a small nonprofit dedicated to free markets and constitutionally limited government in technology policy, I have never encountered such bias. Yes, we struggle to get our message out, but that's probably because our message is more complicated than the sensationalism coming from advocates for bigger government. We are, after all, lawyers and not activists. I often hear conservative groups complain about the bias of social media platforms, but from what I can see after a decade in this field, their real problem is that they just don't use social media well. And let's face it, the young people who use social media best and reshare it most eagerly are overwhelmingly left-wing. This isn't the fault of Facebook, Google, YouTube, or any other platform. It's just always been true. At the Zuckerberg hearing, I was dumbstruck to hear conservative senators call for what amounts to a fairness doctrine for the internet. First enacted in 1949, the FCC's fairness doctrine was supposed to encourage robust debate in broadcasting. Instead, it did the opposite. Broadcasters avoided controversial topics. That enforced bland orthodoxy on radio and television, entrenching what conservatives still call the mainstream media and stifling alternative voices like talk radio. It was President Reagan and his FCC who ended enforcement of this insane policy. And yes, eventually Democrats saw the light too. In 2011, it was President Obama's FCC chairman who finally took the fairness doctrine off the books forever. Yet now, apparently out of misdirected frustration, it is conservatives who are talking about reviving the fairness doctrine, and this time for the internet, and as a condition for the protections of Section 230. This idea would stand Section 230 on its head. In 1995, it was another Republican, Congressman Chris Cox, who recognized that holding websites liable for content created by their users would have the perverse effect of discouraging websites from acting as good Samaritans. Section 230 avoids what has been called the moderator's dilemma, ensuring that websites are free to remove objectionable content without increasing their legal risk. Facebook and other social media sites together employ literally tens of thousands of moderators to remove everything from sex trafficking ads to terrorist messaging. This simply would not have happened without Section 230's encouragement of non-neutrality. Consider Canada, where website operators have no general shield from liability for defamation claims over third-party content. As one Canadian internet lawyer put it, the innocent dissemination defense may be available, but it requires a high degree of passivity and ignorance. I don't think anyone in this room really wants passivity from social media platforms. We want them to filter content, and there's just no way to demand their political neutrality at the same time. What President Reagan said about the fairness doctrine in 1987 remains true today. Quote, "History has shown that the dangers of an overly timid or biased press cannot be averted through bureaucratic regulation, but only through the freedom and competition that the First Amendment sought to guarantee. But instead of encouraging competition, a fairness doctrine for the internet would actually entrench today's tech giants. No, of course they won't like having to justify their content moderation decisions in court, and yes, they may very well restrict political discussions on their sites, just as happened with broadcasting. But today's tech giants would be able to manage vague, arbitrary, and open-ended legal liability far better than any startup. Congress should avoid doing anything that will hinder competition online. And lawmakers should remember what the Supreme Court said in 1943. Quote, "If there is any fixed star in our constellation, our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion." Unquote. The fairness doctrine would do just that, prescribe orthodoxy. This tired idea should be left in what President Reagan called the dustbin of history.
Thank you, Mr. Szoka. Professor Waldman, welcome.
Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Nadler, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Ari Waldman, and I'm a law professor at New York Law School. My goal today is to help the committee understand Facebook's editorial role, the dangerous implications of a world without content moderation, and the serious privacy implications of allowing Facebook and other social media companies to exist in a regulatory void. We all may have a First Amendment right, subject to some limitations, to say what we want free of government intervention, but we don't have a First Amendment right to Facebook's amplification of our words. So let's talk a little bit about how and why platforms like Facebook moderate content. We actually know quite a bit about what they do, partly because of the work of my colleague Kate Klonick, and also because Facebook published 27 pages of their moderation guidelines just a couple of days ago. First, how? Content moderation is a complex ecosystem of technology and people Moderation sometimes happens before content is published, in that period between upload and publication. This is the automatic process, using data-trained algorithms that screen out things like child pornography, copyrighted material, or graphic violence. But content moderation mostly happens after publication, where moderators either proactively remove content that violate platform rules or reactively when users flag content that violates Facebook rules. For this, Facebook employs a large layered team of people trained to do this work. Platforms have normative and financial incentives to moderate content. Every platform designs values into its code. One of Facebook's central values is to bring friends together. As a result, and in response to the manipulation of Facebook by fake news sources, the platform redesigned its news feed to prioritize posts from our friends rather than from media or business pages. That's why engagement went down for some of those media and business pages, not biased moderation. The result is that lots of content gets filtered out, but no more so from the right than from the left. When victims of racist, homophobic, and sexist tweets and comments post those comments to call out the aggressors, it's often the victims that get suspended or banned. Activists associated with the Black Lives Matter movement have reported just as many, if not more, takedowns of images of police brutality and racism than of any of the takedown anecdotal evidence from the right. Facebook has a long history of banning photos from breastfeeding mothers. In 2014, the company suspended drag performers for using their drag names. An advertisement for a book featuring a queer vision of Jesus was also rejected. The artist, Michael Stokes, who is best known for his portraits of soldiers wounded in battle, has seen his portraits of queer soldiers taken down and his account blocked. At a minimum, mistakes happen on the left just as they happen on the right. Consider also what social media platforms would look like without content moderation. Gendered cyber harassment proliferates when platforms like Twitter and 4chan do nothing. They become havens of hate that function to silence women and others' voices, as my colleague Danielle Citron has found. Queer-oriented geosocial dating apps that ignore content violation, like racist and transphobic profiles, become havens for non-consensual pornography and cause untold emotional damage to victims. So why does this happen? Any content moderation that occurs algorithmically is subject to problems inherent in machine learning. Biased data, an inability to understand context, for example. Data-trained algorithms that determine what we see on our news feeds also can't tell the difference between two media articles of widely different veracity. All they know is that a herd of highly motivated users in tight, hyper-partisan networks are clicking on it and sharing it. To the algorithm and to Facebook, this is great. Engagement is at the core of the business model. The problem is designed in. When humans act, maybe content moderation is more art than science, and Facebook doesn't employ enough Rembrandts. Mistakes happen. Those mistakes are far more likely, the evidence shows, to burden marginalized populations, not conservatives. Content moderation on Facebook is part of a larger narrative about how we lack even reasonable regulation and thus allow Facebook to take a cavalier approach to our privacy, our safety, and our civic discourse. This was on stark display when Facebook allowed data on 87 million of its users to be accessed in violation of its terms of service. So although the evidence is not there to suggest systemic bias when it comes to content moderation, there is evidence that Facebook, when left to its own devices, cares very little about the safety of our data. It only cares about collecting it. Reasonable steps must be taken to rein in Facebook's near unlimited power to violate our trust. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor Waldman. Mr. Chavern, welcome.
Thank you. Chairman Goodlatte, Ranking Member Nadler, and members of the Judiciary Committee, thank you very much for inviting me to testify at today's hearing. My name is David Chavern, and I'm the President and CEO of the News Media Alliance, a nonprofit trade association representing over 2,000 news organizations across the United States and the world. Our members include some of the largest news organizations covering events around the globe, as well as local publications focusing on issues that impact communities and daily lives and citizens of every state. Quality journalism is essential to a healthy and functioning democracy, and my members are united in their desire to fight for its future. Too often in today's information-driven environment, news is included in the broad term of digital content. It's actually much more important than that. While low-quality entertainment or posts by your friends might be disappointing, Inaccurate information about the world can be immediately destructive. Civil society depends on the availability of real, accurate news. The internet represents an extraordinary opportunity for broader understanding and education. We have never been more interconnected or had easier access to information or quicker communication. However, as currently structured, the digital ecosystem gives tremendous viewpoint control and economic power to a very small number of companies. That control and power must come with new responsibilities. Historically, newspapers controlled the distribution of their product. They invested in the journalism and then printed it in a form that could literally be handed to their readers directly. No other party decided who got access to the information or on what terms. The distribution of online news is now dominated by the major technology platforms. They decide what news is delivered and to whom, and they control the economics of digital publishing. The First Amendment prohibits the government from regulating the press, but it does not prohibit Facebook and Google from acting as de facto regulators of the news business. Neither Google nor Facebook are or have ever been neutral pipes. To the contrary, their businesses depend on their ability to make nuanced decisions through sophisticated algorithms about how and when content is delivered. The term algorithm itself makes these decisions seem scientific and neutral. The fact is that while their decision process may be highly automated, both companies make extensive editorial decisions about relevance, newsworthiness, and other criteria. The business models of Facebook and Google are complex and varied. However, we do know that they are both immense advertising platforms that sell people's time and attention. Their secret algorithms, and they are secret, are used to cultivate that time and attention, and we have seen many examples of the types of content favored by these systems, namely clickbait and anything that can generate outrage, disgust, passion. The systems also favor giving users information very similar to what they had previously consumed, thereby generating intense filter bubbles, undermining common understandings of issues and challenges. All of these things are antithetical, actually, to a healthy news business and a healthy democracy. Good journalism is factual, verified, and takes into account multiple points of view. It takes a lot of time and investment. Most particularly, it requires someone to take responsibility for what's published. Whether or not one agrees with a particular piece of journalism, my members at least put their names on the product and stand behind it. Readers know where to send their complaints. The same cannot be said about the sea of bad information that is delivered by platforms in paid priority over my members' quality information. Honorable members of this committee, too much is riding on these issues to let them pass without action. The major technology platforms are no longer new or inconsequential. The choices they make have tremendous influence on the sustainability of the news business and many other industries across our economy. We offer no easy answers as to the ultimate regulation of these companies. In many ways, they present absolutely novel challenges to policymakers. However, with respect to the topic of today's hearing, a strong first step would be a simple acknowledgement of the immense filtering and decision-making power that both companies possess and exercise today. Neither company is neutral, and it's wrong to pretend they are. And from that flows a clear need for both companies to have enforceable standards on their algorithmic decision-making, particularly as to fairness and openness, and systems and policies that reward original quality information and content provided by trusted news organizations employing professional journalists. With respect to the latter, we wish to express strong support for H.R. 5190, the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act of 2018, recently introduced by Representative David Cicilline. We believe this bill would go a long way towards reducing the imbalances in the current system of content distribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chavern. We'll now begin questioning under the 5-minute rule, and I'll begin by recognizing myself. Ms. Hardaway, Ms. Richardson, thank you very much for your testimony. I'm sorry you've been through the experience you've been through. Are you aware of other people on the internet, conservatives, liberals, anybody, who've also been censored by social media?
Well, we're looking at people like Governor Sarah Palin, just a lot of people that's been censored.
Yes, even down to the President of the United States is being censored as well, with him having over 23 million people on his platform, unable to garner 1 million views on a video within an hour. Before the censoring, he was able to do that. Now he can't do that. So yeah, there's a lot of conservative voices that are being censored.
Do any of your friends or family or fans reach out to you when they tried to view your content but couldn't?
Oh, absolutely. We get tons of either emails. Go down the side of our Facebook page on our post. Okay, you all did not show up in my news feed. I can't find you all. Or I put you in search. I couldn't find you all. It took me a long time to find you all. You all are not coming up.
We also put out a video where somebody made a video where they tried to follow our page. And the way that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook have their settings set, you click on follow, but it defaults back to just standard. It wouldn't let people stay on follow. And then whenever you click on follow to follow our page, for some people that was able to do so, they did not get a notification whenever we post our post on our Facebook page.
And can I just clarify, Facebook says in their ruling that if you like and follow a page, that you're supposed to receive a notification whenever we drop content. What's the purpose of them following and liking a page? That's the purpose of them following and liking a branding page, because they're going to see and view your content. So it's not fair for Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg to think that they can dictate to people and tell people what they can and cannot see in their news feed. I thought this was a platform for all ideas.
Thank you. I think all of our witnesses have had very valuable testimony, and I agree with a great deal of it, Mr. Szoka. I agree with you. We should not have a standard set for the internet like we used to have for broadcast media. Mr. Waldman, Professor Waldman, I agree with you that these companies are going to do this. They're going to be expected to do it. But I'm most fascinated by Mr. Chavern's testimony, and I want to get into the issue of what we do about it when people are wronged, like Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson have been wronged. Right now, citizens can hold newspapers and other media groups legally accountable if they do certain things in their newspaper, whether it's publishing false information, showing indecent content, that use materials or photos they're not authorized or did not pay to use, and so on. Tech platforms are currently making in-depth decisions, like newspapers make, about what information users receive and how they receive it, often driven by financial and other unknown motives. So Mr. Zuckerberg himself has repeatedly said that his platform is responsible for the content that they host. Should the tech platforms be subject to the same content regulations and civil penalties and libel and slander that those who produce the content are responsible for?
Well, thank you very much. I think we all have to acknowledge that these are novel businesses, right? People say, are they media companies, are they publishers? They're really attention businesses. They want more of your attention, and they will feed information to get more of that attention. I think we all have to be concerned about paths that would lead to them having more overt control over content or being in the content businesses. I'm not sure I'm excited about.
How do we avoid that?
Well, I think we can start by making them responsible for the power and decisions they have today.
And how do we do that?
We'll start by the algorithms, as we say, these rules that they determine. They sort of talk broadly about them, but nobody really knows what's in them. They are secret rules, and if you have secret rules, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. I think they have to start by being much more transparent about their decision-making and actually having enforceable standards about that decision-making, about things like fairness and openness. That's the first place to start, because that's what they do today, and you have to be responsible for what they can do today, and they're really not. They have rules that nobody knows what they are. They have impacts that we can only vaguely tease out. They have to be responsible for their moderation of. So
should that come about by legislative action or by judicial decisions based upon breach of contract or libel or slander or?
I think, frankly, there are many ways to get there, but we're going to keep having hearings like this as long as nobody knows how the secret rules are being applied, right? If you have secret rules, you're always not going to get the benefit of the doubt. And we're going to have to, either through legislation or through their own actions, or could be other options, get to where there's much more transparency about their decision-making. They're responsible for prioritizing quality content that is indicators of trust and not other kinds of content. and ultimately answerable for these decisions they make, because currently, right now, they're not. I mean, we're just sort of guessing about what their algorithms do.
Thank you. Mr. Nadler.
Let me begin by clearing up one important item. The central thesis of this hearing seems to be that social media companies use complex algorithms to suppress conservative voices on the internet. Set aside for the moment whether or not you approve of filtering practices and content moderation generally. Mr. Waldman, yes or no? Is there any compelling evidence whatsoever to support the notion that Facebook, Twitter, or Google intentionally suppress conservative content on their platforms?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Chavern, I hear your concerns about the effect of content filtering on the news media, but yes or no? Do you have any evidence that Facebook, Twitter, or Google intentionally suppress conservative content?
We have not looked at, I have not analyzed
The
it.
answer is no.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Szoka, you represent an organization that represents a conservative point of view. Yes or no? Do you have any evidence that Facebook, Twitter, or Google intentionally suppress conservative voices on the internet in particular?
No, Congressman.
No. Thank you. Absent any evidence on this front, let's move on. I would like this panel's help with the subject matter this committee should be addressing today. Mr. Waldman, earlier this week, we met with Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Christopher Wiley. According to Mr. Wiley, SCL Group, a British company acting under the name Cambridge Analytica in the United States, operated as what Steve Bannon called a propaganda machine in the service of Mr. Bannon, the Mercer family, and eventually candidate Donald Trump. That propaganda was built in large part on information that Cambridge Analytica misappropriated from millions of Facebook users. We should be holding a hearing on this topic, but the majority didn't even send staff to listen to Mr. Wiley's testimony when we had him the other day. Mr. Waldman, what does Cambridge Analytica tell us about Facebook's privacy policies, and why should this committee prioritize those issues?
Cambridge Analytica's ability to access 87 million, information on 87 million shows us that Facebook doesn't really care about our privacy. What allowed Cambridge Analytica to access that information was that the quiz, the psychological quiz, allowed the designer to scrape information through Facebook's API. And the only reason why that exact situation, the exact Cambridge Analytica situation, can't reoccur today is because Facebook decided to just fix that and just stop third-party apps from allowing them to scrape information that way. So that shows us that we are entirely at the mercy of Facebook's good graces to decide if they're going to allow this or if they're not going to. So in this situation, we are allowing Facebook to exist in kind of a regulatory void, as I mentioned, that leaves our data insecure.
Thank you. And what precautions, policies, or security protocols can Facebook and other social media giants use or require to prevent unauthorized third parties acquiring user data for commercial, political, and nefarious purposes?
Well, I think we have to start at Facebook actually enforcing its rules. We learned shortly after the Cambridge Analytica fiasco that Facebook has an internal procedure where people are supposed to check up on the data usage of third-party applications. There's an entire team about it. One of the former employees wrote an op-ed, I believe in the Washington Post, that described, yeah, this was my job, but I was told that I really shouldn't be walking through all the steps that I'm supposed to. So all they did was call someone up and say, hey, are you using this data in the wrong way? And then never followed up. So at first, we have to make sure that Facebook is engaging the tools that they have in order to make sure that this data isn't being used improperly.
Thank you. Now, looking back at the election in 2016, the Russian disinformation campaign may have reached over 126 million Facebook users, accounted for more than 1,000 videos on YouTube, and included hundreds of thousands of messages and posts on Twitter. That accounts just for the 3 companies that were invited here today, and whom I suspect would have come had Republicans shown that they take this subject matter seriously. Mr. Waldman, the Russian company indicted by the Special Counsel's Office for a conspiracy to defraud the United States, the conspiracy at the heart of the Special Counsel's work, spent an estimated $100,000 on Facebook ads. What information does this committee need from Facebook in order to determine the impact and reach of that ad buy quickly if you could, because my time is running out.
Sure. We need what money was spent, where the money came from, what companies were involved and what banks were involved, the way they were targeted, the algorithms used, and how that information was processed.
Okay, I have one final question of a more general nature, again to Professor Waldman. Everybody here, Mr. Szoka, Professor Waldman, Mr. Chavern, has said there's no evidence that they've seen that Facebook intentionally discriminated against conservative views. But let's assume they had. Let's assume they had. Facebook is a private company. Sinclair discriminates against liberal views. Is there any difference in principle? Should we permit? Let's assume we decide that Facebook was completely discriminating against liberals or against conservatives. Should we do anything about that?
There's an editorial.
And the same question for Sinclair, for example, or Fox.
There's an editorial role here. That's what companies that host content do. If they embed those particular values into their design, I'm not sure that it is this Congress's or this committee's role to say that Facebook has to have X amount of voices from the conservative side and X amount of voices from the liberal side.
Congressman, I think I've made clear that I think the fairness doctrine in whatever context is a terrible idea. The government has no business policing speech, period. But I do want to emphasize, Congressman Blackburn noted earlier that there are certain rules on the books about broadcast speech. Those rules have survived scrutiny only because the Supreme Court has refused to grant full First Amendment rights to broadcasters. I think that decision, Red Lion from 1969, is outdated. But I just want to emphasize that we run into a real danger in these discussions of people saying, well, why can't we have a certain regulation that exists for broadcasting? Why can't we have that for the internet or newspapers? And the answer is very clear, because the internet, newspapers, and all other media other than broadcasting are fully protected by the First Amendment. Those rules would never survive First Amendment challenges if brought in court when applied to the internet.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you. Without objection, I'd like to submit two publications for the record. One is Censored: How Online Media Companies Are Suppressing Conservative Speech by the Media Research Center, and the other is an op-ed by Patricia Onwuka in The Hill, titled Diamond and Silk Offer Chance for Bipartisan Pushback on Social Media Censorship, in which it notes that in 2016, a coalition of over 40 left-leaning groups called on Zuckerberg to ensure that Facebook implements an anti-censorship policy that honors and respects Black lives. And in 2017, over 70 social justice groups wrote to Zuckerberg, again calling out the consistent and disproportionate censorship of Facebook users of color. Without objection, they will be made a part of the record. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any questions, but I do have a statement that's really addressed to the missing panel, and you have to wonder, what were they afraid of? Mr. Chairman, the censorship of conservative voices by social media has become more frequent and the consequences more serious. Social media companies have repeatedly censored, removed, or shadow banned conservative journalists, news organizations, and media outlets that do not adhere to their political views. Google's new fact-checking feature appears to target conservative websites. Several conservative-leaning outlets, such as the Daily Caller, are routinely vetted by Google for their content. Equally partisan sites, such as Vox, the Huffington Post, Daily Kos, Mother Jones, and other left-wing outlets and blogs, are not given the same treatment. In March, Twitter censored a Drudge Report tweet of the 2020 campaign slogan, "Keep America Great," as politically sensitive content. Unfortunately, we can expect to see a lot more of these examples in the future. Facebook recently announced this month that it would cut news article share of the news feed from 5% to 4%. Facebook would boost certain trusted news outlets and suppress other less trustworthy sources. The term trustworthy is defined by Facebook, of course. A tech website, The Outline, found that the algorithm changes implemented by Facebook have disproportionately harmed conservative publishers on its social media platform. They're getting fewer readers, while their liberal counterparts have not been impacted to the same degree. And who are making these decisions? The Media Research Center found that liberal Twitter advisors outnumber conservatives 12 to 1. 12 U.S. members of Twitter's Trust and Safety Council, which helps guide its policies, are liberal and only one is conservative. Also alarming are the guidelines being written by these companies to define what is hate speech and what is fake news. Facebook's newly published community standards, which guide what content is allowed and what is prohibited, define these terms for the American people. The Media Research Center has outlined how these hate speech guidelines can target conservatives. For example, expressions of contempt, such as "I oppose gay marriage," could put social conservatives at risk. These new guidelines appear to protect illegal immigrants. Saying illegal immigrants should return to their country of origin would result in a violation of guidelines on Facebook. And if someone called an illegal immigrant who has not paid taxes but gets government benefits a free rider, that would be considered hate speech according to Facebook. According to a 2017 Gallup poll, almost 60% of Americans are worried about the problem of illegal immigration. So if those Americans were to post their concerns on Facebook, they would be accused of hate speech. A majority of Americans could be censored under Facebook's guidelines. As private companies, social media can censor or suppress anyone they want. That's their First Amendment right to freedom of speech. But they should be held accountable by the American people, and the public should realize they are getting slanted information. If social media companies continue to silence conservative viewpoints, millions of Americans should either support alternative platforms or boycott the biased media. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there are important issues to be examined when it comes to social media platforms. I don't know that the topic of today's hearing is really one of them. But I do have a question, and I don't know whether you, Professor Waldman, or Mr. Szoka are the right witnesses to answer. One of the reasons why the influence of the Russians resonated so well from their point of view was the use of bots in amplifying false narratives. And the question is, what jurisdiction, if any, do we have to regulate essentially bots, false personas on a platform? I'm not sure there's a great hook, but it occurred to me that all of the social media platforms have value based on their reach. And if, for example, you have a 2 billion person follower, but 40% of them aren't real, that is an issue that relates to your stock value and really is a misrepresentation of value to investors. I wonder if you have thoughts on how we might either regulate or work with social platforms to reduce or eliminate false persona or bots on social platforms.
Congressman, thank you for the question. I just want to note at the outset that when we do that, we run the risk of restricting anonymous speech online. Now, I will note that Facebook and Twitter have chosen very different approaches, and that to me is the free market at work. Facebook is a community where everyone is supposed to use their real name. Twitter is not. And Twitter is, for that reason, much more vulnerable to the use of bots.
If I may, I'm not talking about anonymity. I'm talking about false persons. Now, if you're Twitter and you say, I've got a billion followers, but 500 million don't exist, what does that say about your share value?
Well, the problem, Congressman, is distinguishing the fake follower from a real person. You know, the old joke that on the internet no one knows you're a dog. You could also say no one knows you're a bot. It's not easy to identify those accounts, and the more we pressure those companies to do that, the more we put them in a position of being accused of censorship, because they will inevitably make mistakes. So, of course, there are things that they could be doing, but this is a difficult technological problem, And I'm frankly very uncomfortable with the idea that the government, whether it's through the SEC, which indeed has started sending letters to companies, they sent one to Yahoo yesterday about a failure to notify its investors about a data breach. There are many
Well, data breach is a very different issue.
It is very different.
My time's almost up. I want to let Professor Waldman, who looks like he has something to say on it,
Thank you,
also to
Congresswoman.
comment.
I remember that cartoon, and the internet is a lot more mature today. Our
Actually,
technology-
everyone knows your dog, so.
The internet is a lot more mature today. The technology is a lot better today. I take the example, I think there is a role for regulatory agencies like the FTC to play, but we can also take the example of now Senator, but then Attorney General Kamala Harris in California, who recognized issues with the technology companies that she had a responsibility to regulate, got them in a room together and decided these are the tools that we need to work together on. We need to make sure that gendered cyber harassment is not proliferating, non-consensual pornography, et cetera. And together, using the stick of potential AG enforcement under California Online Privacy Protection Act and other regulatory tools, she got companies together to come to an agreement about how they're going to use technology to make their platforms safer. I think we could do that too. Let's try to first work with technology companies.
Well, I come from Silicon Valley,
Yeah,
so
of course.
this is not a new concept to me. But the real question, I guess, is in terms, I don't think it's that difficult to identify bots, honestly. I mean, maybe at some future date, people will become more creative and it will be more difficult, but it's not so difficult now. And the question is, what is the standard of knowledge for the companies, especially publicly traded companies, and what is their liability exposure in terms of securities? And maybe we need a securities law expert to help answer that. So my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Sure, thanks, gentlewoman. And recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Ms. Shabbat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll go to Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson, I think better known as Diamond and Spice, first, if I can. Diamond and Silk, my apologies. Hopefully I get the rest of it right.
Okay.
Mr. Nadler introduced and asked the other three gentlemen about whether there was any evidence of Facebook or others blocking conservatives, and they indicated no, they didn't really have anything. But he didn't ask you those questions, and it's my understanding that you have personal knowledge of this, in fact, experienced this yourselves, being blocked because it actually happened to you. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And buried deep in the settings of Facebook, there is a setting called Your Categories, which Facebook label individual account as either liberal, very liberal, conservative, or very conservative. Our personal Facebook account have been labeled very liberal, thus meaning that anybody that is advertising or want to advertise, that's the only type of advertisement that we will see on our Facebook page. So if you are in the conservative and you're advertising as a conservative, your reach will not be far. The reason being is because there are individual Facebook pages that have been labeled as very liberal. Now, with this particular setting, we cannot change it, we cannot correct it, we cannot update it. This has been a default setting set by Facebook on individual personal pages. With that setting set, if you cannot change it, then guess what? Facebook control what you see.
That's right.
Let me move on if I can. It's my understanding that you talk about a whole lot of different things, and one of those is President Trump, is my understanding.
Yes, we do.
And I think in general, you tend to agree with and agree with some of his policies and have been generally pro-President Trump. Is that accurate?
We love our president. We love his agenda. We love this country.
And others have found fault with that, is my understanding. You've been criticized by some for that point of view. Is that correct?
But that's their problem, not ours,
Right.
because this is our platform.
That's right. We do not solicit our page to them. They
Right.
come to our page, and there are something called troll farms. When people come to our page and deliberately, and they thumb down our page, Facebook have a mechanism sitting there that when you thumb down our page, you come to our page deliberately, thumb it down, then there's an algorithm that's put in place where if you get too many thumb downs, now your page is restricted, blocked, your posts disappear, and then shadow banning is there where we can see our posts, but everybody else can't see our
And
posts.
do you think it's unsafe or it's hate speech to offer a positive view of our president?
Excuse me?
Do you think some people, certainly you don't think that it's unsafe or hate speech to be positive about the president, right?
It is not unsafe, or is it hate speech, to love this country and love and stand behind the President of the United States. When Obama was in office, if we had to get behind him, why not get behind this president right here?
Yeah, let me follow up. And then some other things that you've talked about, I think that you believe that we should control our borders. As a country, we have the right to do that.
Absolutely. Don't you?
Yeah.
Ain't this place controlled? When I came up here today, security had to check us out. We just couldn't walk up in here. Don't you secure your house? The border should be secure.
And another thing, if illegal aliens have a right to, don't have a right, but if illegal aliens can come here to America and obtain the American dream, why can't Diamond and Silk?
That's right.
Very good. And some other things that you discuss, my understanding is things like protecting the unborn. Is that something that you've discussed in the past, that you think that we ought to protect those that have a right to have life? Is that something that
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, and first of all, those are our beliefs.
Right.
And we have a right to those beliefs.
Right.
What's wrong with the way we believe? Why is it now in this country, whatever used to be right is wrong, and what's wrong now is right? If I have a belief, that's my belief. But nobody have a right to censor my free speech.
Yeah.
Nobody has a right to do it. And to maliciously and deliberately do it is what really irritates me. It just irritates me.
Very good. Thank you. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We could be here for a lot of reasons this morning. We could be looking into the manipulation of Facebook by the Russians to help Donald Trump get elected. We could be looking into the Russian interference with the presidential election. We could be looking at Russian hacking into state election processes. We could be talking about in this committee legislation to protect the Mueller investigation. None of those areas has this committee been involved with during the last 15 months that we've been in session. We could be talking about gun control. We could be talking about the DREAM Act in this committee. No hearings whatsoever. But what we are dealing with today, we're giving a platform to Diamond and Silk. And you ladies are very impressive to me. You have taken something and you have moved forward with it, exercising your First Amendment rights. And you've made a ton of money off of Facebook. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely not, because Facebook censored us for
Donald
6
Trump,
months.
Now, Donald Trump introduced you all at a rally last year, and he introduced y'all saying that you were very popular and you had made a ton of money based on your affiliation with him. Isn't that correct?
Let me tell
That
you
is
what
not
he was
what
doing.
he said.
Yes,
He was calling those things that was not as though they were, is what he was doing then. But let me tell you something.
But he has given you
But
a-
Facebook
Hold on one
censored us for
second.
6 months.
Hold on one second, ma'am. The point I'm trying to make is you all have been bashing Facebook and you've been making a ton of money. Isn't that correct?
No.
Excuse me,
No.
no.
You've not been-
Wait a minute, hold up. Unsafe to the community.
You've not been making a ton of money based on
But you know
your
what?
bashing of Facebook?
No. We didn't bash Facebook. What
Well,
we
have
did
you
was
been
we
making
brought
a
it to
ton
the
of money?
light on how Facebook has been censoring
been-
conservative voices like ourselves
have
for
you been
6
making-
months, 29 days,
Have you been
5
making a
hours,
ton of money?
43 minutes, and 40 seconds. That's what they did.
Now, I can tell you
Have
something.
you been
we did-
making? Have you been making money? Have you been monetizing?
They won't let
your-
us monetize on Facebook.
So you
They
haven't
stopped
been-
it
They
for
stopped
6
it.
months, 29 days.
So they've been messing with your money then.
Exactly. That's
They
exactly what I'm
limited
about to
our
say.
page is what
They did, and YouTube did also by demonetizing 95% of our videos for no reason at all,
But you
deeming it
still-
as hate
but
speech.
you're still
However,
selling-
allow me to say
Still
that with
selling
them,
merchandise on the.
Well, even
on
if
the
we sell
platform.
merchandise, that don't have anything to do with Facebook. Facebook censored our free speech. And shame on the ones that don't even see that we have been censored. Yet, when the Black Lives Matter people complain about it, oh, everybody is up in arms. Let me just say this here. If the shoe was on the other foot and Mark Zuckerberg was a conservative and we were liberals, oh, all fences and all chains would have broke loose. You know it and I know it. But what I find appalling is that these Democrats, they don't want to take up for our voice.
Democrats would be in the street. Democrats would be in the street right now marching and calling him all type of racist.
I'd like to
That's
give
what
you a
would be
little bit
doing
more
right now.
time. I'd like to give you a little bit more time, but I got to move on. I only got a minute left.
Okay.
But I appreciate you all for your entrepreneurial spirit.
That's
and we're
part of the
and we're
American
giving you a
dream.
And we want to
tremendous-
attain it too.
And we're giving you a tremendous platform with this hearing to make a ton of money when it's over.
That's right. And I hope everybody on Facebook can follow us. if
And
they
like,
would
yes,
to.
that's right. That's right.
And they can
Because that's what it's supposed to be about.
what it's
It's supposed to be about the obtaining the American dream. We are African American women.
That's
If
right.
illegal aliens can come over here and build businesses, why can't we?
Why
And we
can't
were
we?
born on this soil. Oh, you don't have a right to silence my voice.
Well, now I've always heard though that diamonds are a girl's best.
They are, and they hard too. And if I got to be hard and be firm with you, I will. You're not going to brush us off and dismiss us
No, you're not.
like we don't have merit here.
But you
These
prefer-
people censors us
Yes.
for no reason. They put limitations on our page for no reason, and that was wrong.
But rather than diamonds, you're seeking money with Facebook. Isn't that correct?
Well, you know what? If Facebook is a platform for you to make money, then so be it. Everybody
right.
else do
Well, I
it.
respect-
And don't stop us from making any.
And don't make us feel guilty because we and other people that's built their brand page want to make money. We've spent plenty of money.
All
That's
right.
right.
Okay. I'm with you on that. I'm just astounded that this committee would stoop to this level to be positioning you all to make more money.
We really thank the committee for
Allowing us.
to the light,
I'm sure
for
that-
little
I'm a-
voices like us.
I'm sure that you-
It's little voices
Thank you.
like us.
Because it wasn't you. You didn't do it.
Thank
The
you.
It
time
was-
of
it
the
was-
gentleman, the time of the gentleman has expired. I thank the exchange. The gentleman asked the questions. The ladies answered his questions. And the chair now
I
recognizes.
thank the chairman.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me see. I'd almost tempted to yield my time back to Mr. Johnson, but
Bring it. Come on.
instead, before I forget, I have some documents I'd like to ask consent to enter into the record. The first one is from Mr. Jim Hoft of the Gateway Pundit, St. Louis, and he's the one who I think initiated the beginnings of this hearing today. He has taken a pretty hard hit himself in multiple different ways, and I've watched as his views have gone from been dropped down from 33%. Facebook page was 33% of the overall views, down to 3%.
That's right.
1/11 of what it was. That would be evidence of censorship, in my opinion. A number of other comments in there that I'd like to introduce that into the record, along with a Christian publisher says Google banned it over faith we express, which illustrates that quoting the Bible can get you censored in this country. And there are multiple charts here delivered by a Gateway Pundit of other, here's Gateway Pundit's traffic, here's the president's traffic, which the gentleladies expressed in their testimony, the Young Conservatives traffic, which went from around 5.75 million down to essentially nothing, and in a similar period of time, multiple other sites, conservative sites, all of them, the graphics and the charts, it's the best material out here that quantifies this impact, I think, produced by Mr. Jim Hoft, and I hope that one day he can come and testify before this Congress as well, because my private conversation with him has been very powerful, and I ask unanimous consent to introduce these documents into the record. In hearing no objection.
That objection be made part of the record.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And now, where do I go with this? My first thoughts are this, that I'm thinking about situation like Jim Hoft and Gateway Pundit, the fourth most influential conservative pundit throughout the last election cycle, watching his traffic be cut to 1/11 of what it was just on Facebook alone. Yeah. And I don't see that Jim Hoft has as much television presence, perhaps, as our Diamond and Silk have. So I wanted to ask you, Ms. Hardaway, or you, Ms. Richardson, if you didn't have a spot on Fox News, if you had to rely on just watching your traffic go down on YouTube and on Facebook and on Twitter and wherever else, would you have a chance to have a voice to express this, or could it be that because you had another outlet, this issue came up far enough that now America's watching?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because we had another outlet, because the Republicans, certain Republicans spoke out about it and took up for the little voices like ourselves is how this came to light. If not, we would, when they deemed us unsafe to the community, it would have been that. They told us we couldn't appeal it. We would have been out. And this is what happened oftentimes with people in our country, particularly minorities, where these big giants, they take and they put their feet on your neck. They pull the rug right up from under you and then dare you to move. You know, they tell us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But how can we do that when they take those same straps and use them to hang us out to dry? That is not fair, and that's got to stop in this country. And it stops today.
With everybody.
You know, I really appreciate the way you look at the American dream. I want my right to earn the American dream.
That's right. That's right.
And is there any difference in your mind between, say, Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, those, we'll call them utilities, not necessarily public utilities, but utilities? Is there any difference between them and, let's say, UPS and FedEx? If you're making your living selling things and shipping it out on FedEx, is that any different than it is making your living by pitching a message out through Facebook?
Absolutely, because listen, they have these platforms to have it where you can monetize. You can make money off of these platforms. So if you're building your brand and you're pumping money into building your brand, it is not fair for somebody to change the rules in the middle of the game. And I think that's what's happening with the American people, some of them. You change the rules in the middle of the game and then people are left out to dry. That's not fair.
Let me clarify this question. What if you're producing a product, and maybe it's home little garage factory or a larger factory, and you're shipping that product out on FedEx, and FedEx decides you're conservative, so we're not going to deliver your product to your customers. Is there a difference between what's going on with Facebook and what would be going on under that circumstance?
Well, that would be, to me, discrimination.
Yeah, it's on both, discrimination on both sides.
On both sides. And listen, wait a minute. This is for all voices. No voices should be censored.
None.
And this could be bipartisan. I don't care if you're on the left or the right. The deal is that no voices should be silenced, and you should not be discriminating. If it's a platform to express all ideas, express all ideas.
All ideas.
Not just one side.
That's
not
right.
just put it where it's one-sided, where I'm just seeing liberal views, where you have my account deemed liberal when I'm very conservative. I am a Republican, but you don't have that up there. And why are you making those decisions for me? Why didn't you give us the opportunity to put in what we are, our political affiliation? And what does our political affiliation have to do with Facebook? Just think about that.
I want to let you know that I tweeted you out to see if you were blocked on mine, and you're still alive on my Twitter. So thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
I would yield to the chairman.
I just want to thank the gentleman for yielding and take note that it would be nice if these three companies were here to explain themselves and their policies and whether they truly are fair to people all across the political spectrum. Because I put in the record liberal organizations that were concerned about this too. They set themselves up as a platform. They need to promote free speech, not stifle it.
Right.
Did the gentleman yield for a second?
Yes, the gentleman controls time, but I'll yield him an additional
Yield. I'd yield.
to you.
Thank you. I just want to point out one thing. Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson have had interesting testimony about their interactions with Facebook, and maybe Facebook has treated them unfairly, and maybe not. I don't know. But that doesn't establish a pattern, which is the subject of the hearing. Every one of our other witnesses has said there is no evidence that Facebook is discriminating against conservative views in any way. There may be liberal people who have had the same types of problems or not. And I have sympathy for our two witnesses, Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson, for their difficulty with Facebook. But the basic thing is here, no pattern has been established showing anything at all other than that these two ladies have had a problem with Facebook. Maybe Facebook for some reason doesn't like them or whatever. But in any event, no pattern has been established. Thank you,
Coming my
gentlemen, for
time
yielding.
is that the documents that I introduced into the record do establish
That's
that
right.
pattern,
Exactly.
and I hope you pay attention to that. Thank you, and I yield back.
Time, gentleman, has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. And let me also acknowledge my commitment to the First Amendment for all of the witnesses that are here. And our pointed questions to Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson, obviously because they come with important critiques that we need to address, and we need to address it fairly, and we also need to get the facts. Before I do that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pause on my time because I would like to acknowledge Takala Ann Allen and Madison, who are Take Your Daughters to Congress, and I think I see Ms. Husband with a young lady here in the back, and I want them to stand, and I want to acknowledge that this is Madison's birthday. Ladies, stand up. I know you can't hear me. There you are, 13, and you stand up too. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I couldn't imagine a better place for them to view democracy. You may be seated. This is democracy in a Judiciary Committee meeting room. Let me...
Will my colleague yield for just 1 second? I'd like to introduce my daughter as well.
I'd be happy to yield. Mr. Chairman, are you pausing on my time, please? I need to... She wants me to yield for her to introduce her daughter.
Oh, yeah, I won't count against your time.
Okay. But
Tatiana, stand up, from Philadelphia. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be happy. In any event, I think it is important to note two things. One, there is a question of this hearing as to establish whether there was a pattern. I think that's very important. I think we probably have to have 10 hearings, and I don't view this hearing as particularly important. I do want to take note of the fact, Mr. Chairman, that the Senate has just passed out of committee the special counsel legislation, of which it would be appropriate for us to hold a hearing on the special counsel legislation to protect Special Counsel Mueller. That is, in fact, a bipartisan bill with a number of Republicans on it. So I hope, and let me make a formal request that we do so and mark up that bill that has been introduced by Mr. Nadler. I'd also like to introduce into the record articles from Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richard dealing with expressions of dismay or disagreement with a number of entities. Ask unanimous consent to introduce exclusive diamond and silk crash Hillary Clinton's race baiting. She is not our slave master. Diamond and silk criticized Michelle Obama, and then, of course, a message for Oprah. Ask unanimous consent to put these in the record. Thank you. And I think that is clear that there is a First Amendment protection that you all deserve, as I deserve it, as the witnesses deserve it. So let me pose these questions. Ms. Hardaway, have you ever been paid by the Trump campaign?
No, we've never been paid by the Trump campaign.
You've never been paid by the Trump campaign?
We have never been paid by the Trump campaign.
Not $5, not $100?
We have never been paid. We have never been paid by the Trump campaign.
Let me ask a specific question. $1,274.94.
We have never been paid.
Ms. Hardaway, my understanding is that you received the now infamous email from Facebook, the email calling your page unsafe on April 8th, 2018?
No. That was not April the 8th. We received that on April the 5th, 2018.
Thank you. Now on April 11th, you appeared on the Ingram Angle on Fox News to discuss this matter. The host, Laura Ingram, asked, did you get contacted by Facebook, and has this been reversed? Have you been contacted by Facebook?
We was contacted via Twitter on April the 12th.
You responded, we have not been in communication with Facebook, we have not been contacted, we have not spoken to anyone over the phone.
That's true. We hadn't been in contact with them, we haven't spoken to anyone over the phone.
Right, they said it was in direct communications with us, and we had not been in direct communication.
Did you, on that show, say that you were not contacted?
We were not contacted. We was contacted on the 12th. We was contacted on the 12th via Twitter.
All right, so are you saying that you did not lie on that show, or you did lie?
We did not lie on that show. We did that show on the 11th. We was contacted by Twitter on the 12th, by Facebook on the 12th via Twitter. And when we looked in our verifies, there they were.
Is it your testimony today that as of April 11th, when you went on Ms. Ingram's show and said that Mr. Zuckerberg had lied about trying to contact you, that Facebook never reached out to you or Ms. Richardson about this issue?
Mark Zuckerberg said that they was in direct communication with us, that like they had spoken to us. They did not do that.
Did you get information from Zuckerberg or Facebook?
No.
By any means of communication?
No.
You just said you got it through Twitter.
We got it through Twitter on the 12th, on April the 12th.
The next day.
Hold on for a moment. Ms. Jackson, don't try to mince my words. Let me explain to you this here. April the 5th, 2018, they took and they deemed us unsafe to the community and told us it wasn't appealable.
Have you
that
got
was April the
April
the 12th is when they.
I am the one asking questions. You're in a judicial committee hearing, and I respect you, and you're going to respect me. Now, my question is, have you gotten contact from Facebook? And Ms. Richardson may want to answer it. Have you?
No.
All right. And you're saying under oath that you did not. And so the Twitter is not communication?
The way you're asking that question is a little confusing. No, you're asking that question and you're missing words right here.
Have you gotten any communication from Facebook?
On April the 12th, via Twitter.
And what mode was that?
That was via Twitter.
All right, so, and you got information. So your testimony that you did not is not truthful.
That is truthful.
Let me move on to Professor Waldman.
Time of the gentlelady has expired.
I asked that my introduction of my two young ladies not be attributable to my time.
How you use your time is yours, and that did count on your time.
That is not the case.
Yes,
Professor Waldman, I'd like you to answer this question.
Time of the gentlelady has
If
expired.
Facebook attempts to answer the question or respond,
Time of the gentlelady has
is that
expired.
legitimate that Facebook
Time
can
of the
in
gentlelady
fact,
has expired.
is that legitimate that
Time of the
Facebook can
gentlelady
in
has
fact
expired.
be held to
We're going to get
standard
through
where
all
they're
the
trying to
witnesses.
correct
We have to
the
observe
problem?
these time guidelines. We can't give everybody
Mr. Chairman,
2 extra
I
minutes.
asked for the chairman to have gotten out of the seat when he said yes, and the staff is standing here, and they need to be able to speak up. I want this question answered by Mr. Waldman.
Thank you, madam.
Mr.
Time
Waldman,
of the gentlelady
can you
has
answer that
expired.
question,
There may be
please?
time after everybody
Mr. Waldman,
else
can you answer the question?
has
Mr. Waldman, can you
Facebook.
answer the question? You're not
Time
going
of
to
the gentlelady has
Facebook has
expired.
an opportunity to make those decisions for its own.
This
part.
time we'll
And they
recognize
don't do it
Mr.
in a
Biggs
biased
for
way.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Waldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been very interesting. I want to make clear, I keep hearing the Democrats say that all 3 of the male witnesses have testified that they have seen no evidence of any kind of bias against conservative thought on these platforms. That's true, I think, with Mr. Szoka and Professor Waldman. Mr. Chavern indicated, I think, that he had not indicated.
We had not examined the question.
He had not examined the question. So that to me is a kind of a misrepresentation that we've heard consistently from our friends across the aisle all hearing. So thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Chavern. I also want to add some additional information with regard to what we've seen here today. There are other reported instances besides Diamond and Silks. I appreciate all 5 of you being here today. The Sportsman Shop is an instance that they noticed that one day their Facebook advertisements promoting the sale of American flags had been removed. And after reaching out to Facebook, they noticed that all of their advertising capabilities had also been made unavailable. This is a problem, and Facebook provided their indication that anything that linking to sales of firearms would be blocked henceforth, but not with companies like Dick's and Cabela's. This is kind of to me, that's an indicia of bias. Gizmodo has reported as well that news curators within Facebook have also admitted that they do suppress conservative thoughts and ideas. And there's been some work done by other researchers who have indicated that just under half of U.S. adults use Facebook for news. They're massively influential in news, but when they changed their platform, we saw from January 2018 a steady decrease in the top 25 biggest publishers on Facebook. They moved from many of the conservative links, such as Fox News, Western Journal, etc. They moved consistently, post-change, further down that list. Now, I don't think anybody's isolated the variables necessarily to say that the audience may have changed, but it does provide some correlative indicia that the result of that algorithmic change by Facebook impacted the dissemination of conservative thought and ideas, and that is what we're trying to get at today. We're not trying to get into the issue of privacy. That's been going on in other issues, and that's an issue that we can take care of as well. George Upper, the executive editor of Western Journal, has said this algorithm change, intentional or not, has in effect censored conservative viewpoints on the largest social media platform in the world. This change has ramifications that in the short term are causing conservative publishers to downsize or fold up completely, and in the long term could swing elections in the United States and around the world toward liberal politicians and policies. Mark Zuckerberg said that we've rolled out a number of changes to newsfeed that try to boost in the ranking broadly trusted news sources. The one thing that's interesting here is he doesn't indicate his definition of broadly trusted news sources until he gets to this, Wall Street Journal or New York Times. And he says even if everyone reads them, the people who don't read them typically still think they're good, trustworthy journalism. And I don't know if that's true either. But the point is, they control this massive platform. They make money off this massive platform. And they then, in turn, regulate that platform themselves, as right now I think it's their right to do. I think it's their right to do. The problem is they hinder, and perhaps deliberately so, the ability of others to pursue their ideal. Now, I just want to quick point out, I think that was very interesting because this was reported April 25th in in Western Journal, that Google rejects Christian publishers' ads because they mentioned Bible and Jesus.
Time of the gentleman is expired. Thank you. Chair recognizes Jackson Lee for a unanimous consent request.
Chairman, I thank you very much. I just wanted to indicate that to the witnesses that I want to make sure the First Amendment applies to all. I want to put it into the record, however, for Ms. Hardaway, Ms. Richardson, that it may be this number is up or down, but they have 650,000 on Twitter, 1.5 million on Facebook at this time, 140,000 subscribers on YouTube, but I think they have grown in their Facebook numbers in the last 3 weeks, upwards up to 350,000. Let's let the First Amendment be the guiding post for this hearing.
Was that a unanimous consent request?
Consent.
It doesn't sound like it.
It's a unanimous consent. I'm submitting these numbers into the
Well, they've already testified to something different, so I'd have to object to that being submitted.
Well, I have a right to put the materials in the record.
Absolutely.
I think so. I asked unanimous consent.
But with the testimony of others, not as if that is,
Well,
yes, so we'll allow that into the
Thank you
record.
very much.
And I did want to make sure the gentlelady understood the time of the gentlelady was paused for 30 seconds earlier. So with the introduction, the applause, you did get an extra 30 seconds in addition to another minute and a half after the gentlelady. So gentlelady had 2 more minutes than anybody else will have today. This time, the chair recognizes Mr. Deutsch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks very much to all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I represent the city of Parkland, Florida, where on Valentine's Day this year, a young man walked into Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School with an AR-15 and killed 17 people in 6 minutes and 20 seconds. For hours, students across the campus ran in fear, hid for their lives, hid in closets inside locked classrooms. Now, the student survivors of Marjory Stoneman Douglas have received a lot of attention, not merely because of the attack and because they were there that day, but because of how they have responded. And that's because they've grown up in a world where mass shootings are relatively common. In many deeply disturbing ways, they were prepared for this event. And in the days after, having grown up in an active shooter world where they all had active shooter training and nevertheless watched their friends die beside them, in the days after the shooting, they didn't hold back. They documented the reactions of their classmates as amateur reporters. They spoke out across the media. They called out this Congress's failure to do anything to stop these tragedies, or this committee's only action on gun laws opening up every state in the country to the lowest common denominator through concealed carry reciprocity. I am tremendously proud of these students. But some people have used social media platforms to attack them. They have been called crisis actors. They have been called tools of the left. They have been disparaged, and they have been defamed. David Hogg, 17 years old at the time of the shooting, was depicted as Adolf Hitler. Emma Gonzalez was shown ripping up, this was a video she posted, ripping up a Target. Then there was the photoshopped image of Emma Gonzalez ripping up the United States Constitution. This is real. This is bogus. And yet, this was circulated over and over and over again on the internet to willing viewers who were ready to accept it. The images went viral. Millions of users saw them in minutes. Truthers have spread lies, claiming that the event never happened, that the 17 people who were gunned down in my community did not die. That's made the rounds on the internet. Just like they did and continue to do about the 26 and 7-year-olds who were slaughtered at Sandy Hook. That's all published on the internet. So I appreciate the conversation of free speech, but I'd like to inject another concept into today's debate. That's the concept of morality. I would ask Professor Waldman first, is there a consideration of morality by the tech companies whose platforms are used to spread this vile and outrageous and offensive garbage that attacks kids and denies the very existence of a horrific event that tore the heart out of my community?
Facebook likes to call itself a neutral platform only when it suits them. In situations like this, where terrible pictures get proliferated through their platform, but they know, as well as we know, that the problem is designed in. Facebook likes when those images get spread around because they want the additional engagement, they want the clicks, they want the hyper-partisan networks to spread this around. So they're not thinking about what's right and what's wrong.
Let me ask you a question. Are they under any obligation, I already asked about the moral obligation, is there any legal obligation to protect either the individuals attacked or others from this sort of ugly and defamatory content?
They are under no legal obligation to do so.
And is it, Mr. Chavern, if they are publishers, and a number of, all of our witnesses have acknowledged the role that the technology companies play in distributing news, if they are distributing news, do they have some editorial responsibility to ensure that this type of, in this case, of the manipulated images, that this never appears, and that the invocation of Nazi imagery also not appear? Is there any obligation to do that?
Well, they express editorial control, and this gets to the heart of my testimony in the sense that that kind of content, through propulsion and the algorithms, crowds out the content of my members. Crowds out, by the way, the journalism that was done in your community about what happened, such that there is a built-in preference for content that drives attention but may not be accurate or correct.
Just last question. Is it censorship to expect that this image, this false image, be taken down the moment it appears?
I think I would come at it differently in that I think there's a responsibility to give at least much emphasis on content and content from responsible sources than to what we have is the opposite, is highlighting irresponsible sources.
Irresponsible and
I'm a
dangerous. I
gentleman
yield
that's
back. Thank you.
expired. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. There's a story from about Facebook on Fox News, where they list a number of things, like Lauren Southern was suspended because of criticizing censorship, given a specific example of that. The administration of a pro-Trump group was banned for saying Trump is not anti-Muslim, but he is anti-ISIS. Facebook locked kids out that posted videos supporting Rudy Giuliani's criticisms of Obama, calling it suspicious activity. Facebook approved Christian hate groups, and I'm not going to even mention the names, they're so vile, coming after Christians, but shut down Christian groups quite often, and examples are given like Kirk Cameron's movie Unstoppable. Christopher Campbell was blocked for 30 days for expressing his opinion about attacks in Cologne, Germany, and the right to bear arms. Canadians were censored for criticizing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's response to refugee shootings. I mean, there's lots of examples. And if you could indulge me, Mr. Szoka, Mr. Waldman, and Mr. Chavern, if you would look over to your right at these two ladies, well, obviously, Mr. Waldman doesn't like to, well, thank you. But anyway, I just wanted you to see evidence of improper censorship. They are walking evidence of Facebook censorship. I know you say there's not any evidence, but there is. And it's been given here today. It will continue to surface in the future. And I would like to also point out, just an observation I've had, Alan Keyes, Clarence Thomas, they're heroes of mine. And they can let you know that nobody, and Golden Silk can substantiate it, I don't think there's anybody in America that suffers more vile reproach and bigotry than black conservatives. And if you throw Christianity on top of black and conservative, you're just at the bottom of the pile. Alan Keyes has certainly experienced that. Clarence Thomas has as well. I did want to ask Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson, you paid Facebook for your post to be boosted on their platform, correct?
Sometimes we do.
But you had an agreement for content promotion with Facebook. Wasn't there an example where you paid them to boost your platform and it was not boosted?
Well, we've paid them to boost our platform, but it didn't reach. And the reason why it didn't reach is because they have labeled accounts as very liberal that's not very liberal. So of course your stuff is not going to reach.
And they also place limit on our page. They have a little red sign there on the top of our Facebook page that stated that it was limited.
Right, they did that. And I just need to clarify something because I don't like to be called a liar. Facebook did not reach out to us until via Twitter on April the 12th. The last time we heard from Facebook was on April the 5th, when they deemed us unsafe to the community.
Well, when the Twitter was posted, was that posted only to you, where only you could see it?
Well,
or was that for
we have a
everybody to
verified
see?
account, so when we went into our verifies, that's when we saw it, and we was very transparent because we put it out there
But did
online
other
for
people
everybody.
see that?
Yes.
So it wasn't just a communication to you, it was communication to the world.
It was on
You were
That's
not
right.
singled out. They
And we-
didn't specifically communicate to you.
No,
They-
it was no
They put
direct
something out to the
communication.
world to make it look like they were
Absolutely. They had got caught in the hot seat. Mark Zuckerberg had lied. Maybe he got it from his PR people. We don't know. They was never in direct communication with us, and I need to clarify
Let me just
that.
point out, FedEx, UPS, they hold themselves out as getting your package where you want it to go. But suppose they started saying, you know what, if you're conservative, if it's a conservative destination, we're not going to deliver it. I mean, it seems like Facebook, YouTube, some of these are holding themselves out to be a public platform and be a public square when actually They censor, they set up algorithms to determine who gets more. I mean, it would be like saying you have a public square, but we're going to put you on the public square in a soundproof booth. So in my last 10 seconds, let me just say, I'm not for more government regulation, but I do think since they are deciding what goes on and what gets censored, they should be liable, and I'm working on laws to make that happen.
Love it.
And with that, would recognize, who's up next? Is it Mr. Jeffries? Recognize Mr. Jeffries for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank all of the very distinguished witnesses for your presence here today. Question for Mrs. Hardaway. Have you ever publicly expressed an opinion about the presidency of Barack Obama?
No, because I wasn't into politics or anything like that. So when you say, wait a minute, hold on, when you say public, well, not when he was in office. Let me back up. If I had something to say, it was during the election when they were running.
And what was that opinion?
That I didn't think he was a good president. He didn't do anything for the black community. Look at the people from Chicago, and he was from Chicago. So I had a very vocal opinion. But while he was in office, like before the election, I didn't publicly say anything because I just wasn't into it
Appreciate
until Donald
that.
Trump came along.
Now, are you familiar with a governmental entity called the Federal Election Commission?
The FEC, I am.
And are you aware that presidential campaigns are required to submit what's called campaign finance disclosure reports with the FEC?
Yes.
And those FEC disclosure reports detail contributions made to the Trump campaign. Are you aware of that fact?
It could be. I mean, okay.
And the FEC reports also publicly disclose what's called expenditures or disbursements made by the Trump campaign. Are you aware of that fact?
Well, I keep hearing it. I heard somebody put out a news article that was out there, but.
Okay. Let me enter into the record, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent for what's called the post-general election FEC report filed by the Trump campaign on May 12th, 2017.
Yes.
Can he tell me how much the
Mr.
amount
Gomer?
was? Okay.
Without objection. Yep.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Hardaway, I think you stated on the record today at least 3 times, quote, "We were not paid by the Trump campaign." Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, are you aware that your testimony today is under oath subject to the penalty of perjury?
Yes, we are aware of that.
Okay. Now, the FEC report dated May 12th, 2017 states that on November 22nd, 2016, the campaign of Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated paid Diamond and Silk $1,274.94 for field consulting. Are you familiar with that?
We're familiar with that particular lie. We can see that you do look at fake news. What happened is, and what should have happened is, you should have come to our mouths to see what exactly happened before a false narrative was put out there about the $1,274.94. So let me explain right now to you and the world.
Hold on one second, because I want to give you the opportunity to explain, which is why I'm asking the question.
Right.
I'm actually trying to figure out, are you calling this FEC document fake? Well, actually, let me get some clarity.
No, we're not calling that fake.
I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond.
Okay.
I'm just really I'm struggling. I'm really just trying to figure out, right? Because you have an FEC document that clearly indicates that the two of you were paid for field consulting by the Trump campaign. That's just one document. There may be others that are out here. And presumably, this was a document filed with genuineness and authenticity by the campaign of the president that you so love. And so I'm just trying to figure out,
We understand that this was
is lying here? Is it the Trump campaign, or is someone not telling
Nobody
the truth?
is lying. However, there may have been a mistake from the Trump campaign whenever they wrote what the $1,274.94 was for. Actually, this was for because we was asked to join the Women for Trump tour back in 2016. And Miss Laura Trump asked that our airline tickets be refunded back to us because we paid for those tickets when we went from New York to Ohio. I have the email right here, which substantiates what happened on September the 11th whenever Laura Trump wrote to Allen to tell them to reimburse us. So that
I appreciate that explanation. So now let me just ask you one final question.
No, it was for a reimbursement.
I understand.
That's right, not field consultants.
I understand.
We've never been paid by the Trump campaign.
I appreciate that, and I'm just trying to figure out whether, consistent with what the president indicated, he urged you to monetize your support for him. And I'm just trying to figure out.
He urged us to monetize our platform, and there's nothing wrong with that. As an African American, you're not going to make us feel guilty because we're going to get out here and we're going to take advantage of these platforms and monetize, just like everybody else do. I don't see you walking up to a white person and saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be monetizing that." So why are you, as an African American, making it?
The gentleman's time has expired.
With us monetizing our platform.
I respect your game. I really do.
Gentleman's time has
I'm just trying to get an
It's not a game.
understanding of whether funds.
The gentleman's
change
time
things
has
or not.
expired. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. First, I want to thank Chairman Goodlatte for calling this hearing and also being open to listening to all of the witnesses' testimony here before the committee today on this very important issue that we must get right. The rights we hold as Americans should be upheld, whether we're speaking words in an open forum, writing words in a book, or typing words online. So we have to uphold our First Amendment and its protections in all aspects of our society. While I did not get the opportunity to ask my colleague, Marsha Blackburn, a question, I'm very glad that my friend and colleague had the opportunity to come before our committee today and discuss her own personal experience as well as her work here in Congress to be an advocate for an open and fair internet. As Representative Blackburn explained, she had her pro-life message about fighting the disgusting practice of the sale of baby body parts stricken from Twitter because it was deemed inflammatory and would cause a negative response. It's appalling to see that the very unborn children who cannot yet speak for themselves and has an advocate fighting for them to only be erased by others. I'm proud to be unapologetically pro-life, and I strongly believe that our online platforms must be neutral public forums, which would allow us to continue to speak out for the unborn. I'm glad that all of you are here today and have had the chance to express your own unique circumstances with content uploaded on various online platforms. Your perspective is extremely valuable to this very important conversation. I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Chavern. Did I say that correctly? Today, I've had and I apologize, there's a lot of hearings going on right now, so you've seen members come and go. But I had the opportunity to hear firsthand from Michael Galvin and Bro Cruft, the president and editor respectively, of my hometown paper in Montgomery, Alabama, the Montgomery Advertiser. And as members of the News Media Alliance, they have shared with me some of the concerns that you expressed in your testimony today. And I'd like to ask you to use the remainder of my time to expand upon how apps and tech platforms are impacting local and regional journalism. With that said, before I turn it over to you to finish out my time, I just think that this is a very important conversation again, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. I hope that this is the beginning of more conversations, as we have seen across many different platforms. As technology continues to progress, it's important that Congress is listening and taking note. And so I'll leave you the rest of my time to expand upon your testimony, but although the chairman's not here, he knows that I hope that we will continue to have more conversations along these lines. And again, I thank you each for being here with us today.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you. Fundamentally, as the communications and media world is progressing, Google and Facebook are the primary distribution mechanisms for news online. That's how people get their news. And, but the rules under which Google and Facebook manage their content emphasize low-quality news options and make it very difficult for people who are actually in the business of journalism and paying journalists and doing real reporting for making that a sustainable business. And if present trends continue, you have these huge incentives for really low-quality, bad information online that pushes out actually verified quality journalism. And that's not just bad for our business, right? That is extremely bad for our civil society. You know, we'll get to a place, people's curiosity about the world, what's happening in their communities, will always be there. The question is, what will satisfy it? Will actually professional journalism satisfy it, or will it be free garbage that feeds inherent need for people to feel passionate and angry about something?
So setting a good example, my time is about to expire, but again, I look forward to continuing this conversation down the road. And again, I appreciate you all being here today.
Thank you.
I now recognize Mr. Liu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. This is a stupid and ridiculous hearing. The only reason I'm still here is I want to enter some facts into the record to at least try to salvage some of this hearing. So I want to put in the record an article from USA Today, December 5th, 2017. It talks about the top tweeted U.S. elected officials. Can I put that in the record? Okay, I'll enter it later. The top 3 elected officials. Number 1, Donald Trump. Number 2, Vice President Pence. Number 3, Speaker Ryan. The notion that social media is somehow censoring conservative folks is ridiculous. And 3 witnesses today have testified that that's not happening. And we don't do laws by anecdote, at least I hope I don't, and we shouldn't. But there's a more fundamental problem. The First Amendment applies to the government. Can we just get that clear? It does not apply to restrict content of private companies. So let's just go through something very simple. And I'll ask you, Mrs. Szoka. We don't tell Fox News what to filter, right?
Correct.
And we can't tell Facebook what content to filter. The government can't, right?
Correct.
That would just be flat out unconstitutional, right?
Yes, sir.
We can't force Facebook to carry Diamond and Silk if they choose not to. Isn't that right?
Correct.
You know, I've seen places that regulate content on the internet and in the media. North Korea, Russia, Iran. We don't want to be like that. Why are we having a hearing about regulating content? It's unconstitutional to begin with. But let's go a little further into this. Everyone has a right to monetize. So Facebook monetizes. You know how they do it? You know how I can get stuff out on Facebook and make sure lots of people see it? I pay for it. You pay for ads, and then they send it out. They don't care. The notion that somehow Facebook has to carry certain people and promote them is ridiculous. They do not have to do that. Twitter doesn't have it. These are private companies. They are not like UPS or FedEx. They are like publishers. They're like the media. And the fact that we're here debating, should we regulate content on the internet, is completely ridiculous. I don't know why the Republicans want to even think about doing this. What makes America great is we get to say stuff and not have the government intervene. And yes, do I think it's bad that there's no regulation on the internet? Probably. But you know what's far worse? Is to have the government regulate it. Who's going to decide? How do we even write a bill about how we force Facebook to carry certain people or not, or Twitter to carry certain people or not, or to promote people more or less? I don't even know how you can write a bill like that. And this entire hearing makes no constitutional sense to me. So I want to get some more facts into the record here. So, Mrs. Szoka, the Communications Decency Act, it's true, isn't it, that is largely one of the things that caused the internet to expand and grow.
It is the law that made the internet possible.
And one of the prime features of that act is we're not going to go ahead and regulate and sue companies based on content. Isn't that right?
That was a Republican idea in 1996.
Exactly. And when we tried this regulation of the media through this stupid fairness doctrine, it was Reagan that said, as you said, it should go into the trash heap of history, right?
Yes, sir.
I always thought that the Republicans stood for limited government, not having the government intervene into the aspects of private companies. I don't know why we're here at a Republican-controlled Judiciary Committee talking about intervening into what Google or Facebook or Twitter or any other tech company should do or should not do. We should let the marketplace of ideas go out there. But guess what? If Facebook's not into that, if they want to write algorithms that promote certain things, let's say they want to write algorithm that promotes cats. Can the government stop them from doing that?
Thankfully not.
And let's say Facebook figures out, you know, promoting cats gets a lot more people to sign on to Facebook than promoting Diamond and Silk. Can the government intervene and stop Facebook from doing that?
No.
Okay. And let's say Twitter figures out, you know, we're to promote nice, cuddly images of furry animals rather than dismembered body parts. Can the government say you can't do that?
No.
And let's say Google has decided, you know, we're just not going to carry people that talk about Pizzagate anymore. Can the government say you can't do that?
No.
Okay. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Szoka, you submitted testimony. In your testimony, you gave a thoughtful analysis of congressional intent. Can you describe the approach courts have taken to determining when interactive computer service providers have immunity under Section 230?
Thank you, Congressman. That's an extremely thoughtful question. This is exactly where people get confused. Section 230 is not an absolute immunity. It does not exclude criminal prosecution, and it depends on two things. First of all, you are only immune against civil litigation or state criminal prosecution for content created by third parties. Once you take a role in helping to create the content, once you become responsible for development of that content, even in part, you are no longer immune. So if Facebook starts actively creating content or editing user content in a way that changes meaning or creates its own political content as it creates videos today, none of that is protected by Section 230.
Is there consensus among the courts on that analysis?
This is crystal clear. The courts have touched upon the term neutrality, but if you read those cases, it's very clear that they meant something completely different. What they meant was that the tools, for example, that roommates.com used were tools that were not, quote, neutral because they required users to actually commit housing discrimination. That was a non-neutral search tool, but that's very different from political neutrality. The whole point of the statute is to give service providers immunity in making decisions about removing objectionable content. That is crystal clear.
Well, how does, again, neutrality doesn't appear in the statute, but how does it factor in to 230?
Well, if anything, Section 230 is designed to encourage non-neutrality, to say to service providers, website operators, that they can make whatever decisions they want about removing content, and it's up to them. The only limit...
Do you ever cross a line, though? Does it ever cross a line where an algorithm or something can be doing that?
There is one other line in the statute, which is that the immunity we're talking about here, Section 230, C2A, requires good faith. There's not a lot of case law on that because most of the case law is on the prime immunity, that's 230C1. But good faith has been, for example, the courts have said things like, if you are acting in anti-competitive ways, that wouldn't prevent an antitrust suit against you. But there's no case law to suggest that that good faith requirement requires political neutrality. And I think that implying that would be unconstitutional. It would put the government in the position of determining what speech is appropriate and what speech is not.
One of the things that I've been concerned about is the violent and extremist content that's out there. Your testimony referenced a news story that Facebook added 3,000 employees last year to help screen for violence. again, this is an issue that we have in our culture. What is your assessment of social media platform screening procedures for filtering and removing content that displays extremist or violent content?
That they probably need to do more. I am a civil libertarian, but as Congressman Liu mentioned, this is not an issue of the First Amendment. I think these platforms have a moral responsibility to filter out content like that, and that's why Section 230 is there, so they can make those decisions without fearing increased legal liability, but it's not for the government to dictate to them how they do so.
You know, one of the things I've seen over the last 10, 15 years in our culture is this demonization, where the right demonizes the left or the left demonizes the right. You can't even have a policy difference anymore. And I'm wondering, Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson, do you feel as though you've been demonized?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Our brand has been tarnished. We've been lied on. They're saying it's a Facebook hoax. This is not a hoax. People, lives, and livelihood has been damaged from what these giant techs do to people. They pull the rugs from up under them. And then I hear people say, well, oh, this is a private entity. This is not public. Well, they went public in 2012.
This is a separate issue. There's a cultural thing going on out there where it's not okay just to have a disagreement anymore.
Right.
Right.
You know, people have legitimate policy disagreements in our
And
country.
if this is a platform for all ideas, then anything about my political, I should not be categorized through Facebook based off of my political affiliation.
Right.
There shouldn't be a mechanism placed there with Facebook to say what my political affiliation is.
And we should start learning how to agree to disagree so that we can get along in this world, so that we won't bicker back and forth. We should use this here as a bipartisan effort to bridge the gap so that we all can have free speech. And we shouldn't act like it don't exist. We should act like that we're not being censored. That's what really irritates me. It infuriates me.
My time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Reskin, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I wanted to echo our colleague, Mr. Liu, in saying I'm a little bit astonished how we've descended to the level of political theater and spectacle in this committee when there are so many important issues that we've not dealt with. For example, a universal criminal mental background check on firearm purchases, which is supported by 97% of the people, or what we can do to defend the Mueller investigation against continuing political attacks. But in any event, we are where we are. And I wanted to start with something Mr. Gohmert said. He quoted a Fox News story about apparent reprisals or intimidation against a Facebook employee for political purposes, and then I quickly pulled up an article about political intimidation and reprisals against a Fox News employee for political reasons because she wanted to do reporting about climate change. Is there anybody on the panel who thinks that the government should be compelling Fox News to allow for the use of the words climate change or for stories about climate change if they don't want to run it? Is there anybody who thinks that that's the role of the government? Okay. And is there anybody who thinks it's the role of the government to be compelling Facebook to follow some other ideological or political policy? Okay, so we all seem to agree then that the First Amendment is what operates in this field, and then the question of the government's role turns on the role of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which we've started to discuss. As I understand it, there's two parts to it. One is that the internet service providers, the social media, are not legally responsible for third-party content. But the other part of it is that they're not responsible if they decide to censor content based on it being pornographic, vulgar, profane, or I think it's written in very vague, broad terms, or any other objectionable reason. I wonder if anybody wants to quickly opine on the constitutionality of that provision, because essentially what we're doing is we are taking what we've defined as a media entity that's protected by the First Amendment in other contexts, but then we're uniquely and selectively insulating them from legal liability for certain kinds of things, even not just in the case, I think, Mr. Szoka, where you're talking about where they didn't know about what was going on, but if they do know what's going on, they could still be insulated legally from it. And I wonder if anyone thinks that that creates constitutional due process problems from the standpoint of someone who believes they've been libeled or someone who thinks that they've otherwise been a victim of illegal conduct by one of the covered entities. If we, both of you take a shot at it, yeah.
So I take your point. I want to emphasize here that Section 230 does not stop anyone from suing the person who has defamed them. So that is just off the table. The question is, can you hold the third party responsible? And I would just emphasize that Congress understood that if you held the third party responsible, you would discourage them from being good Samaritans.
But that's true of newspapers and TV just as well. I mean, in New York Times versus Sullivan, the Supreme Court said the New York Times could be held accountable if it knew that it was publishing defamatory content. This seems to insulate the internet providers, even when they know that something, for example, is defamatory, saying, well, they've got a right to publish it anyway.
And the crucial difference here is that Congress understood in a bipartisan bill in 1996 that if you treated online service providers as if they were newspapers, at the scale of the internet, where you could have billions of users and decisions that are made in real time, that you would not be able to have the newspapers screen content the way that service providers online screen content, the way that newspapers screen letters to the editor, because of the scale involved, and that as a practical matter, you would simply see online discussion of controversial topics cease, that user forums would no longer be available.
But you would agree then that does make it sound a lot more like a public utility, the way that Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson are talking about it. You're making it sound there as if, well, we're going to create special rules for them because everybody uses it and the volume of traffic is such.
No, sir. This protection applies to websites large and small. The smallest blog is actually the best served. They are the ones that need Section 230.
No, I agree. It's all the blogs, but it's on the internet as opposed to, the newspapers are responsible for what they publish, whether it's the New York Times or it's a community newspaper.